Hello again, guys. All right, I'm going to hopefully finish up our book this time. So we are going to go to page 32, and it is called British Forces. King George made it official. The colonists were rebel outlaws, misled by dangerous and ill-designed men, traitorously preparing war. Enough was enough. He had shown them who was boss. He had to show them who was boss. The king enlisted more troops in Britain and hired German troops too. He sent ships to blockade the American coast, so the colonists couldn't get any outside supplies. Then his soldiers sat back to wait for the colony army to fall to pieces. The king's war hardened, brutally disciplined, and well trained fighting force included 5 kinds of fighters. Down at the bottom it says British regulars, also called redcoats. All senior officers were noblemen. Each up in rank was bought for large sums of money. Privates usually enlisted for life. Most were recruited in taverns, debtors' prisons, or in slums, or were convicted criminals. Though their pay was extremely low, every single one proudly wore an elegant, brightly colored uniform. Officers and privates alike looked down their noses at the Americans as backward peasants who couldn't be taken seriously. To them, George Washington was a rabble-rouser, not a general. British officers addressed him as Mr. Washington instead of General Washington in their letters. So then it just has Major General, Light Dragoon, Grenadier Officer, Light Infantry, Private Foot Soldier, and a Royal Highland Foot Soldier. Down below that, they have the Haitians. About 30,000 tough, highly trained German troops were paid to fight for the British, who couldn't raise enough troops at home. Most of the Britain's money filled the pockets of Most of the Britain's money filled the pockets of a German prince who had sold the men's services. The soldiers themselves were poorly paid. And then they have the Grenadier, Field Jaeger Corps, and the Dragoon. Next, you have the Loyalists, also called Tories. About 1 in every 5 American soldiers fought alongside the British troops or acted as their guides or spies. Most were honorable people who risked their lives for the crown. Most, but not all, came from privileged classes. Others were black slaves who hoped to gain their freedom by joining the army. And they have the New York Brigade, winter uniform, New York Slum Brigade, summer uniform, and a ranger. Then over on our next page, you have the Indians. A majority of Native Americans, a majority of Native Americans in war fought for Great Britain, mainly because they didn't want the colonies to take away their land. Then they have Joseph Brant Mohawk, chief, corn planter, Seneca chief, and Red Jacket was a Seneca orator. Then down at the bottom, they have the British Navy, which was considered the world's finest naval force. Its 468 war vessels and transports moved almost unopposed up and down the east coast of North America to deliver fresh military supplies and food from England to British troops. And then below that, in that middle section there, it says, in Europe, soldiers were taught that the fair and honorable way to fight was to march openly into battle in columns, line up in rows shoulder to shoulder, and advance toward the enemy without firing a shot until they were close enough to be sure of hitting their targets. Since their muskets were not very accurate, they fired together all at once. Troops were traditionally trained to fight on flat land during the daytime in good weather. Nothing had prepared them to fight their way through thick forests, raging rivers, mosquito-infested swamps, and long mountain ranges. Let's see here. Now on to page 34. We have rebel forces. Actually, I'm going to pause here because we might not be reading that section. Give me just a minute. Let me pause. All right, I'm back. We are reading that section today. So we have, our next one is Rebel Forces, which is page 34. George, oh, you know what? I'm going to pause so that we can do our Zoom and then I'll finish reading.